here is what I have learned about leadership communication in 15 minutes that actually later resulted in 47 books. I headed to my first meeting with my thesis director more than a little nervous, and he requested that I had sent him the first 100 pages to be sent before meeting with the entire thesis committee when I was working on my master's degree. He was a prize-winning novelist himself, so I didn't expect to skate through the first meeting unscathed, but I was confident that I had a winning book. He mentioned for me to sit down. He asked a few questions about why I'd written this or that scene or dialogue. And he said about the book, it's fine for a first draft. It just needs to be tightened. He riffed through the pages. He pulled out a page in the middle of the stack and he handed it to me and he said, here's a good page. He'd scribbled excellent across the top of that page. And I thought, one good page? I stared at it. I was trying to decide what made that page special and the rest of the pages in the book garbage. Months and months I'd worked on that book to polish it. Tighten, I thought, what did he mean by tighten it? And so I said to him, can you take a page out of this book and show me what you mean? He pulled another page out and he slowly took his pen and he began to slash through words and phrases and sentences and paragraphs as if they were just garbage. And that proved to be the most valuable 15 minutes of graduate school. Here's what I want to elaborate on. That professor understood how to be a coach, not a critic. And that, I think, is a critical leadership communication skill. And I suggest to you that it's the essence of leadership communication. Here's what I want to cover in this webinar. In this session, you're going to learn how to respond to the most important question that you will ever have someone ask you. And I know as a manager, you get questions all the time, but what is the most important question and answer? I'm going to be talking about preventing micromanagement. People hate to be micromanaged, and I know that most people don't think they are a micromanager, but how do you know if you are? And then increasing personal presence. How do you do that? Because that makes you influential. And when you're influential, you're persuasive. And then we're going to talk about thinking on your feet under pressure. How do you, when you get asked a tough question by your own staff, by a customer, by a client, by your own leadership team, how do you do that with credibility and authority? How do you increase trust and create a culture of trust in your organization? And then how do you lead productive meetings rather than have meetings that ramble? All of these things we're going to discuss in this webinar. Now, do these things look familiar? Most people would have to say that some of these are very familiar. The lack of coordination, things dropping between the cracks, rumors, rework, accidents, conflict. So back to my thesis director that I just started talking about. He knew the essence of being a coach, not a critic. How do you do that? The takeaways in that first story that I told you are these. If you think about that incident, that opening incident that I mentioned, he was a person who focused on what I call the donut, not the hole. In other words, he started with what I had done right, not the mistake. He didn't start off by saying, I don't like your dialogue, I don't like the plot of this book, I don't like the chapters. Instead, he focused on, it looks okay, but what you need to do to improve it is just to tighten it. And if you think about it, when you word things to your staff, it's much easier to say things like, you need to improve it, you need to change it or modify it, rather than just replace it or redo it or rebuild it. Your wording Your phrasing matters. And then he stated the goal. The goal overall was it needs to be tightened. It needs to be shorter. So the result, I knew the goal, the result was just to cut out the wordiness. And then he provided a model. He pulled out a page and said, this is what you need to do with it, to go through and cut out the extra words. So when you're providing a model for your staff, it helps them to understand the tactical things that they need to do. And then probably most of all, he led with strategic questions. He didn't definitely say, you don't need this chapter, or you don't need these words, or you don't need this dialogue. But he said, consider this or reconsider that. He asked guiding questions. So as a manager, leaders often guide and they grow their team with strategic questions rather than always giving the answers and rather than always giving directives. So strategic leaders and thinkers use questions to advance discussion, and they use case studies as a coach, not a critic. Now, I want to talk a little bit about micromanagement. We all know that micromanagement drives employees crazy. I want you to, for a minute, contrast my professor's manner that I just mentioned with Eleanor's leadership style. Eleanor was a past client of mine. Now, I recognized her name as soon as my office manager put the call through. She had been a client a couple of years ago when she brought her daughter out to our office, to our training center. And her daughter had just finished graduate school, and she had wanted me to work with her on executive presence and help groom her so she had more credibility and more authority with the team so she could quickly move up into executive leadership. Now, this was a very large commercial real estate firm that we had in the United States. They had offices all over the country. And when the call came through, Eleanor said, I need to meet with you today. She said, preferably this morning. Can you come out here, or I can come to your building? And so I said to her, can you tell me a little bit more about what the issue is? And she said, my life is falling apart. I need to talk to somebody now, this morning. Now, I'll have to tell you, we're not used to people calling us about life and death situations. I mean, they call us about keynote speaking, about training, about buying books. They're just not that desperate. So I said, Eleanor, is it a communication issue specifically, or is this a general management concern? She said, I don't know. And her voice began to crack. She said, maybe it's me, maybe it's my management style, but everybody comes through here has a problem. Some sales deal has gone south, they want help with. Nobody's happy. Nobody likes our policies. If it's a conflict, it lands on my desk. They walk right past my daughter's office. Nobody wants to deal with her. They always come to me to settle every problem. And I said, Eleanor, are you talking primarily about your work or your family? And she said, both. I just need to talk to somebody now. Do you do that kind of coaching? And I said, well, I'm not a psychologist, but if it's a communication problem with your staff, sure, I can help you with that. And I'd be willing to rearrange my schedule and come out to meet with you today. And then there was this long pause, and she said, so send me a proposal, and I'll get back to you tomorrow by the end of the week. And at that point, I did immediately identify the management problem in her organization. So micromanagers don't often recognize themselves as the person who caused the problem. Their indecisiveness, their mixed messages, they always think other people have caused the problem. Micromanagement demoralizes engaged people, and it kills innovation. So sometimes as a leader, you only diagnose the problem, and you have to step aside to let your people find the solution. So here are 4 suggestions when you're working as a coach, not a critic. You want to start with open-ended questions when you're talking with them. For example, when they start with a problem, you say something like, in what way do you mean? Will you describe the situation in more detail? How so? What would you say is the best way to go about doing that? What's your reaction so far to the plans I've outlined? So you're continually guiding them with the questions. And then the second way you coach, you listen to their answers and then ask follow-up questions. Don't stop with your first set of questions. You're always peeling back the onion, so to speak. Don't stop with that first layer. Why is that? When does that happen? How much do you estimate that might cost? Are there exceptions to what you've just said? And then ask them to separate fact from opinion. Now, they may be a little insulted when you do this, so you have to do it very subtly. You might say, specifically, what experience or incident are you referring to? Would all experts agree with the conclusions you've just stated? Can you please forward your statistics on that? Could you send me the link on the study you're referring to? And you ask for collaboration. That's the fourth type of question you might ask. Who else do you think would agree with you on that? Or have you thought about who might disagree with you on that? And if they're honest, they're going to have to tell you, well, of course, all lawyers don't agree with me on that, or all of our accountants don't agree that that's the best way to finance, etc. So again, those kinds of questions will help you guide their discussion rather than micromanaging them through a project. Now, let's talk about being strategic when you get asked a question. Many times when you're communicating as a leader versus as a manager, there's a great deal of difference. I know as an author, people are always asking me this one question. So what's your book about? And if I go on and on like a movie trailer, their eyes are going to glaze over. They don't want this big, long spill, the entire story. So again, when you get asked a question, the most frequent question that most managers get asked several times a day is, what are you working on? Now, you don't want to just push that question aside as if it's a light question and just be lighthearted about it. If you want to be strategic and you want to be seen as a strategic player, you should take that question seriously. And I recommend that you answer it so that you are seen as a strategic player. As a manager, managers tend to look for smooth, flawless operations. They want no bumps in the road. But a leader wants to improve the situation and increase the value of the asset, just like you invest your monies. If you give your money to a money manager, you don't want to get it back at the same amount that you invested it. You want that portfolio to be worth more. Same thing with a manager. Managers just maintain. They often lead people from the simple to the complex. They want that process to look complex, more or less, to justify their job. But a real leader often tries to break the complex down to the simple. That is strategic. A manager knows when to be abstract to avoid offense. They don't want to come across as blaming. But a real leader knows when an ounce of specificity, using specific words, specific processes, is worth a ton of abstraction. So when you get asked that one question that you're going to be asked every day, what are you working on? You want to be very specific, very concrete, but help them see how you're improving the situation. I suggest you answer that one question with these 4 parts. The first part of your answer should be, here's what I'm working on. This is the big picture problem that I'm trying to solve in the organization or in my department or my area of responsibility. The second part of your answer should be, here's why it matters to the organization. This is the big picture significance of my answer. And then the third part of your answer should be, here are the outcomes, the advantages that we're working toward. This is the benefit that we will try to achieve. And then depending on who asks you the question, this is how the work may affect your time and budget. Now, you don't always put that fourth part on, but depending on if it's your staff who asks you that question, or maybe someone in another department, this is how it will, if it does affect their department, this is how it might affect your timeline and your budget. If you answer with those four parts, when people say, you know, what project are you working on? What's your department doing these days? You will be seen in a better light, a more strategic position and contribution to the company, rather than just giving an insignificant answer. Always keep in mind that when you communicate like a leader, you must be concise. You must repeat your message over and over and over. I recall once doing a seminar for a very large utility company in the United States. We had been working with them for 2 days, teaching a concept that I'm not going to present here, but we are known for this concept. We have a trademark that's called the MADE concept. It's an acronym, M-A-D-E, and each of those letters stands for something, M-A-D-E. And I had written about it in a book. They had it in their workbook. We had it on flip charts around the room. We had it in posters. We talked about it for 2 full days. And this big utility company was about to roll this program out throughout the entire company for thousands of employees. And my contact was going to do an evaluation at the end of the 2 days. And they had invited a couple of vice presidents to step in the room the last 20 minutes to hear from the attendees to see what they thought about it. And so I was feeling really good about how the program had gone. And just the last 20 minutes for the evaluation period, a couple of vice presidents stepped into the back of the room to hear the comments. And so the contact person said, all right, can you give some feedback? How did you enjoy the program? And the comments were very glowing, and I was very pleased. And all of a sudden, this elderly woman spoke up. She was about ready for retirement, and she said, I love the program. All of our engineers, all of our people in every department should have had this program. In fact, I love that concept she talked about, that MADE format, that M-A, that M-D, that E-D, well, whatever it is, I won't forget it. I was obviously quite embarrassed, but it brought home the point that you have to be brief. You have to say things over and over and over, because people just don't remember. If you're not brief, you will be disremembered, disregarded, and dismissed. The higher up in the hierarchy that you present a message, the more you have an opportunity to be dismissed, because they have so many things on their radar screen. Just think about it. Twitter characters, 140 Twitter messages. You have 140 characters to get your point across. Books used to be 60,000 words. Now they're generally 30,000 words. You have TED Talks that are 18 minutes. And so you don't want to get down on in the weeds when you brief someone. You have to make it easy for them to grasp. I want to present a format for you to think on your feet, so that when you are asked questions, when you are doing a presentation, when you are in a meeting and you present your ideas, you get to think on your feet very easily, and particularly when you are just speaking extemporaneously, when you're in a meeting and somebody turns to you and says, can you give us an update? Can you say a few words about blah, 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 and you have no chance to prepare. How do you think on your feet? Here's a structure to follow when you can't prepare ahead of time. The first, we call it the LEAD format. It's an acronym that stands, it's L-E-A-D, that stands, first of all, for a lead, as in a newspaper lead or a magazine lead. Not the verb form, but the noun form. Give a one-sentence summary. It can be either an overview of your project, if you're giving a project overview. It could be an opinion. If they ask you your opinion on something, a one-sentence overview of your opinion. And then go back and elaborate. Give your elaboration. It could be your reasons for your opinion, or data or numbers. Just support or fill in the blanks, support your opinion. And then the third part of your update or your status or your comments is an anecdote. Give a concrete example or illustration of what you mean to make it very, very clear. And then the last part of your comments, give us the digest. A digest is a condensation. You know, if you give a digest of a book, it's just a mini summary. It can be a one sentence. In fact, for most short questions, it would be a one sentence summary. You can actually repeat the very first sentence that you started with. So if you follow that format, when you have no time to repeat or to prepare for comments, it will help you to build a case so that you touch on logic and emotion. And we know that if you go all the way back to Aristotle, he said, when you are trying to persuade someone, you need to do three things. You need to touch them logically, and that's where the elaboration comes in. You need to touch them emotionally. That's where the anecdote comes in. They need to identify with their everyday life. And then he said they need to believe in your goodwill. And you may look at this format and you say, well, what does that have to do with goodwill? Well, because you've given them a very clear-cut opening statement at the beginning that they understand, and you've wrapped it up at the end, it proves that you want to be understood, that it's not wishy-washy, it's not hard to understand. You know, you've walked out of meetings before and you've talked about a topic and you think, well, what did they say? Did they say yes or no? This is a very clear-cut opening statement and a very clear-cut closing statement that makes it easy to follow. So let me give you an example of that. I know that we don't have time to read this entire chart, and that's not the purpose of this chart, but let me give you an example. Let's say that you are the boss and your team has been given an award for something, and someone calls on you as the manager to say, hey, your team has won this award. Would you say a few words? You're accepting an award. And look over in the third column, this last column over on the right. And you haven't prepared to accept this award, but you just have this lead format in your mind to organize your thinking spur of the moment. You might come up to accept the award and you say, well, I'm shocked but thrilled to accept this award because I know the struggle my team went through to win this award. So that's your opening statement. You've overviewed how you feel. I'm shocked but thrilled. And then E, elaborate. Your elaboration is your reasons. This award is special to me because, frankly, it's just plain hard to work to meet the growing criteria, blah, 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 and you continue. And then you give your second reason. Second, this award represented coverage new ground for us because we had to, and you would go on to explain why it's new ground. And then you give a third reason. The third reason I feel so honored is just thinking about all the past recipients, and maybe you name other important people who've won the award. And then A, the third part, you give a concrete example about why you're so thrilled to win the award and why it was difficult. Speaking of covering new ground, I have to tell you about the sale Tom Hicks closed that put us over the $10 million mark. We had this one prospect, Greta, call a couple of weeks ago. She was very angry, and you tell a story about why your team was so excellent in winning the award, even though one of your customers was very angry, and how you turned them around and changed their attitude. And then D, give a summary statement. So let me wrap up by saying that I'm surprised but thrilled to receive this award that acknowledges our team's work in the face of some unique challenges. Thank you for the honor. So you've summarized again almost exactly like you opened. So if you will depend on this format, LEAD, to organize your thinking, you can use it when you have no time to prepare a statement, when you're giving a project overview, when you're responding to a question. It helps you speak in a concise, clear, authoritative way. Now, another thing that improves your persuasiveness is your personal presence. Whether you're online, whether you're speaking through your writing, or whether you're physically present. And when I speak in front of a group, giving a keynote, I frequently call out to the group and I say, what characteristics, attitudes, habits, skills constitute someone's personal presence? And they will call out anywhere from 30 to 35 traits, attributes. All of them generally fall in these 4 buckets or categories. How someone looks, their dress, their posture, their movement, their confidence level, how they stand, how they move, how they walk, how someone talks, their sentence pattern, their word choice, their language, their rhythm, how someone thinks, the way they express themselves, the kind of thing I was just talking about with the lead format, how they organize their thoughts, how persuasive they are, if they ramble on and on, or if it's an organized way to present their ideas. And then how they act. And by act, I mean things like their character, integrity, are they arrogant, are they humble, their competence. Now, you'll notice the things that are most observable, their look, right, when you see them immediately, is the least important. And of course, what is most important is their character, their integrity, their values, and that's harder to see. But all of those things make you more persuasive. Now, if I were doing something like this in person, I would be doing a demo on body language. And obviously, I'm not there with you and can't do this in person, but I can give you a handout that will give you some tips, about 12 tips. If you would like to download that complimentary handout, you can go to boerresearch.com, download tips, and download those after the webinar. What I am talking about there, though, or what I want to make you aware of here, is that no matter what you say, how you say it, how you think on your feet, your body language always trumps your words. People will always, if they're in conflict, your body language is in conflict with what you're saying, people will always pay attention, more attention to your body language. It will drown out your words. So if you're going to be persuasive, that will be the most important thing. Now, let's move on to trust. How do you build a culture of trust? I, by nature, am a very skeptical person. I am not going to go through a very long situation, but let's just say that very recently, I got scammed out of 25,000 US dollars by someone who knew how to be very trustworthy. They went through all the things that someone does when they build a culture of trust. You can fake trust. It's difficult, but if you study it, you can do it. You should be doing that, obviously, purposefully, and some people don't know what the steps are. I want to go through those steps so that you are much more believable when you're trying purposefully to build trust with your team. And that is obviously to tell the truth. And that is the whole truth. Even if it's bad news, be straightforward with your team. And then by that, I mean, give your reasons for your actions and decisions, the real reasons. What happens many times is a manager goes, a leader particularly, goes behind closed doors. They think through things. They have the numbers, the data. They analyze the situation, and then they just announce a decision to their staff. And then they're shocked when everybody doesn't buy into it and doesn't cooperate. They have to, the staff has to have your reasons. They have to see the same things, the same numbers, the same data to come aboard quickly. And so part of building trust is letting them see your reasons, your real reasons, the numbers, the data. And then you have to make your actions match your words. For example, if you're talking about we need to cut expenses, we need to be careful with the money we spend, but then they see you set up some executive retreat, that just goes against what you're saying. So you have to be the same everywhere. The messages have to be consistent throughout the organization. If you have a policy, it needs to be implemented consistently throughout the organization. And then obviously people want to follow people who are competent throughout. Show humility. Not many people like an arrogant leader, and that's important to building trust. And then demonstrating confidence. Again, when you say something, you have to sound like you believe in it. And if you don't sound like a confident leader, your body language doesn't sound that way, your voice doesn't sound like that, yet you say a policy is going to work, you say a procedure will work, you say you believe and you can accomplish something, you state a goal, and it doesn't sound like you believe that initiative is the right initiative or that solution is the right one. If you don't look and sound the part, they are not going to have confidence that this solution will work. And then have a positive outlook. That is part of trusting as well. People don't like to work for negative people. If you're always down on things and you interpret a negative attitude in any one of those ways, how you look, how you talk, how you think, how you sound as you pass on policies, that people over time feel weary and depressed, and they don't like to work in that atmosphere. And then trusting others. They don't give trust if they don't get trust. All of those are important over time in building trust, so that when something goes wrong and something happens bad, they don't pull for you if you haven't been pulling for them. And then know your meeting investment, your return on investment. What I mean by knowing the meeting investment and running the numbers on your meeting, that's where a lot of people waste time. Sometimes the solution is easy. Before I give you a format for actually measuring how much you're spending on your time, I, as an author, know that when I go in to talk to a publisher, I have about 20 seconds to present an entire book idea. It's a given in Hollywood. You cannot sell a movie if you cannot pitch your plot in one sentence. If you cannot sell the idea to your editor in about 20 seconds. That's how long a buyer, when they walk into Amazon, and I know you have the same online booksellers, if you cannot pitch your book and get them to stock your book and sell it in about 20 seconds is the average time the bookseller has, then you're not going to sell your movie, you're not going to sell your book. Same thing about productivity and meetings in the corporate setting. People hate to go to meetings that waste their time. Sometimes the solution is easy. For example, one of my clients, who's a large hospital system in the US, they scheduled their meetings so that the meetings were scheduled at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 1 hour apart, but they didn't think about the fact that their campuses were 15 minutes apart. And so the meetings were always starting late. And so the last meeting was supposed to start at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, but they were winding up being still going at 6 o'clock and at 7 o'clock in the evening. And of course, that was because people were late arriving at the meetings because they had to have transport time between the meetings. So all they had to do was to remember that no meeting could last longer than 45 minutes. That gave them time to get from one building to the other. So they only could schedule a 9 o'clock meeting, and then it had to end at 9:45 so they could get to the next meeting. One client of mine, IBM, I'm sure you know them, they're around the world, had an issue that their culture was that everybody had to be in consensus before they arrived at a decision. They only had one method of coming to decision, through consensus. And there are about 7, when I teach a meetings class, there's 7 ways to come to decision. So they just had to learn multiple ways of making decisions. And then another key thing is that sometimes in meetings, people only have one way to set up agenda, and that's with topics. And that's a poor way to set up your agenda. And I'll show you a different way in a moment. But let's talk about knowing your return on investment for a moment. When you set up your return on investment, let's think of it this way. Your cost of meetings, let's say that you have an employee who makes $100,000. Just the average in the United States, and you can do this with your own calculation, they estimate, the US government estimates that the benefits cost them another 0.4 to their salary. So if they make $100,000, you multiply that by 0.4, and the real cost of the organization is $140,000. And the Census Bureau and the government says that the average employee is working 2,087 hours. So that means roughly that the average employee makes, let's say the average engineer is making $67 an hour. If you have 10 people sitting in a meeting, that meeting in an hour costs $670. So if you have a 2-hour meeting, that meeting is costing $1,340. So you have to ask yourself as a leader, do you want, are the topics you're discussing worth $1,340? Or could you do a survey and get the same information out? Could you send an email and get the same information out? That's what you're working toward. So use this format yourself. Estimate the annual salary of your attendee. Just guess. Look at the people you have in your staff meeting and guess what that is. Step 2, compute that average attendee's hourly rate. Now again, your rate in your country may be different. Ours is 2,087 hours work week. So for us, as I said, that would be a 67-hour work week. Multiply that hourly cost by the number of attendees, and I just chose 10. So that would be 670 hours that we have sitting around the table in that meeting. Multiply that hourly cost by the length of the meeting. So if we had a 2-hour meeting, that would be $1,340. So if you use that format and you plug in your numbers, you will know how much that meeting is costing you. Now, the final thing that I want to mention about meetings to improve your meeting is to decide, are you plugging power into your agenda? And yes, you do need an agenda. I want to show you the one thing that will probably improve the productivity of your meeting more than anything else that you possibly can do. And that is setting up an agenda in question format. Now, I want you to look at one section of my agenda here, and that is not just the topics, but the issue. Look at this column right here, the second column. Most people, when they set up an agenda, just have a list of topics. Like, let's say you're going in to meet with a client and you're in sales and you're introducing your team, and then you're going to talk about the results of research you've done on the client, and you're going to talk about this project and the objectives. That is not a good agenda. Why? Because the meeting tends to go all over the place. But if instead you take it one step further and you formulate questions on these topics, then it is laser focused. The discussion starts off immediately on a question. So look here at this third topic on project objectives. When you start the discussion on the project objectives you want to do for this customer, you start off talking about what's an acceptable metric for the load time of this software we want to install. Should the maintenance be done internally with your team, or would you like us to do that externally? And then what's your ideal completion date for this project? So if you have those 3 questions, immediately your discussion is very focused. And then you've allocated 15 minutes for this discussion and for decision. So you have on your agenda these 3 things filled out. Why do you have the timing? Because then you know what's expected. Now, sure, you can change the timing. If you need more timing, you can adjust on the fly and decide that needs 25 minutes. And then you might decide, hey, we don't have time for this down here. We'll take that up on the next meeting. And then you put down the format here. Why would you say this decision? This is maybe for recommendation. Sometimes you say this is for input. Why? Have you ever been in a meeting when people discuss something and they walk out and they think, oh, we never came to a decision? Well, sometimes your purpose for a discussion is not for decision. They feel like their time was wasted, but it actually wasn't wasted. You didn't intend for the meeting to, or the discussion to end in a decision. You just wanted to hear from them, or you just wanted to give them information. So then they know here was the purpose. You know, Joe or Deepak was going to just give a presentation. You weren't going to make a recommendation. Or sometimes it's for consensus. And then you have someone, you project this on the wall so that everyone can see, and whoever's taking minutes actually records the conclusion you come to on the ones that you're supposed to make a decision. Or maybe if it's discussion, someone is highlighting right here, here are the 3 points of the 3 takeaways of this discussion. And then if someone is supposed to follow up, you put their name right here. Ravada is supposed to follow up, and this is the date, and somebody's supposed to bring back a list of key suppliers. So this, it becomes your minutes after the meeting, and you send this out as minutes for people to follow up. This kind of sample agenda is a huge time saver, and it keeps everyone focused. So before I wrap up this, I'm going to stop here for questions. And since I'm having difficulty hearing you, Mr. Joffrey, I'll let you take it from here and see what questions, see if I can see any in the chat box, or maybe I will just wrap up since I can't hear you, or yes. Maybe you want to call back and ask me questions. Decades, productive, powerful, persuasive communication can accelerate your career. It can change you and your organization. And obviously, it will improve how the world works. Thank you very much for being with me.
Thank you.